All right, we are back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast, talking Brooklyn Nets basketball as they are up 2-0 in the first round of the playoffs. Joining me today, the guy who covers them for the Athletic, somebody I had on the podcast last year when they're getting ready to go into the bubble. Alex Schiffer is here. Alex, how are you?
I'm good. I didn't realize it had been that long. Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot different from when you're in the bubble to now, isn't it?
Yeah, roster looks a little bit different.
I will certainly say so. And I will say, of all the first round series, they seem to be in the most cruise control of everybody because they are giving the Celtics no chance to breathe right now.
I agree. I would say that they've probably looked the best of any first round series team. I mean, obviously, the Sixers had a decent push from Washington in game one. The Bucks series, I mean, game one was a nail biter, game two was an absolute blowout, even on the Western Conference. So yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I mean, they've definitely looked the most in control of their series compared to everyone else of the higher seeds.
Yeah, that's a good point. And obviously, you've seen both games. So, what's the big takeaway you've seen from these first two games? It's like, oh my gosh, this team's going to steamroll the championship. They have issues. What's the biggest thing you've noticed watching these two games?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely playing better defense than they did in the regular season. I'm not ready to call them, like what Virginia is to college basketball or anything like that. But I mean, I definitely think that the defense has improved, and in game one, I think they need to lean on it a lot more than they did last night. But clearly, they've done a good job of bottling up Jason Tatum, which again, he's not a one of one comparison to Giannis Antetokounmpo, but obviously that they're going to need to limit stars' touches and possessions in postseason games if they want to take this far. I think Tatum isn't a bad starting point given what they're going to see in the later rounds.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the big storyline coming out of game two is the injury of Jeff Green's foot, and they held him out the rest of the game. So they didn't need him. They won pretty easily. But is there any level of concern for this injury going forward here? Because they are not very deep down low.
Yeah, I think a little bit, especially given the way that, I mean, he has an NBA record or tied it for most postseason appearances with different teams at 7. So, I mean, he's one of the most experienced postseason guys on the roster, and obviously has played with just about everyone on the team at some point, whether it was Kyrie and Joe in Cleveland or Kevin and Harden in Oklahoma City. He has in-house knowledge that a lot of the other guys lack for sure. There was no update on him last night. We didn't get a chance to ask. I would be a little cautious because some of those foot injuries can linger, but it also wouldn't stun me if he's back out there for game 3. I mean, he's taken a lot of shots this year, whether it's to his shoulder and a couple of other places, and he's played, the next game or only had to miss one or two. So I think there's a little bit of concern, but I don't think a ton. And obviously, as you said, I mean, he's been their best. The statistics say he's been their best defender in through the first 2 games. So I mean, he's been a big part of what they do for sure, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with the way they are playing right now, they're up 2-0. They have the big 3 click, and they can obviously sit him out if they want to and get him ready for the next round. Like, who would you think they would go to if they have to sit Jeff Green for a little bit? Do you think it'd be more Blake Griffin minutes or like more like smaller ball 5?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely think you would see probably Nick Claxton and Blake Griffin get more minutes divided between them. But I also, Steve Nash has gone with 8 or has gone with 9 for his postseason rotation. I don't see him going shorter to 8 given the loads these guys were already carrying. So I agree. It'd be interesting to kind of see where they elect to go. I mean, do you put someone like Alize Johnson out there who has some of Jeff Green's length, but maybe not all, and can kind of play some of those spots and switch a bit? I think maybe he's a candidate. It's an interesting question because, as you said, they don't have a lot of guys after. And then do you go super big and put DeAndre Jordan out there for a bit, even just because you might need him in later series? I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I think those 2 guys would probably be the first 2 you give a look to, maybe even more so DeAndre than Alize because of his postseason experience. But as you said, if he were to miss significant time, where they go as a bench, given their depth down low, would be a fascinating problem for Steve Nash to handle.
I feel like Steve Nash has an interesting setup this series because this is one where we basically said it's either going to be a sweep in 4 or the gentleman sweep of 5 games. So I feel like they're not going to take much longer to get through here. You feel like he's going to use the rest of this series as sort of an opportunity to sort of test his rotation, see what works, because they did not really have a lot of time with these guys all together in the regular season. They only played 9 games together, 202 minutes. So what do you think about the chance for Steve Nash here to sort of experiment with his rotations here? No, considering it's almost a free pass for him this round.
Yeah, as he pointed out, the amount of time the big 3 spent on the court together in the regular season is shorter than the Irishman. You said 202 minutes. Irishman's 210 minutes. I think, obviously, I think winning's the priority. I mean, I think if they have some blowouts Jason Tatum, we'll see what's up with him in his eye too. But I think that if they have some blowout games to where they can they're trying to get guys to 30 minutes or 33, 34 minutes a game without overusing them. Maybe they'll probably spend some of those minutes freelancing or experimenting, but also, I mean, I think you also play with fire at that point too, right? I mean, the biggest blessing in Steve Nash's eyes, but they were completely healthy going into the playoffs. You leave those guys out there longer than they need to be out there, and you risk something, you risk bad karma to me. It's like, I've seen teams leave the star player in during blowouts and then it blows up in their face. So I think there's some room for that, but I also think that, to me, if you can get them out of there, without having to use them too much and take control of the series, whether it's 4 or 5 games, as you said, I don't expect to go past that. I think that, that's the priority. You try to find, you try to pick your spots to try and experiment where you can.
Yeah, I know. Like, I talked to Steve, and he'd love to have his team win very easily every game. Not that he could get his guys rest out of there, but I wonder if like this team had one white knuckler in the series, where they had to play hard down. So that would be a benefit to them going further in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be interesting because I had thought that if the Bucks Heat series went to 6 or 7 games, which right now it doesn't appear that's going to happen. But if it had, would the Nets be at an advantage in that Milwaukee series because their guys have less wear and tear and usage than Milwaukee, given they have, the Brooklyn would have like a 4 or 5 game series. But now it looks like that the Bucks series might be over as quickly as the Nets series. So I kind of wondered that too about, the longer they play in some of these series, the better it might serve them. I just think that given the injury histories of some of these guys and everything, and the teams they're going to face, I think the quicker they can take care of business, the better it should serve them, especially if, again, I don't know if Philly's going to have much resistance on their way to the conference finals, but especially whoever comes out of that Nets Bucks series, assuming they both advance, is going to probably need all the breaks they can get against Philly.
Yeah, and right now it looks like the Bucks most likely opponent for that. So we saw them play twice in a row at the end of the regular season. Great games. The Bucks won both. So is that something that they can take anything out of those games and sort of help them get ready going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, I think there's a lot, not a lot in that. I think James Harden's presence was missed so much in those games. His ability to manipulate the floor and pick apart defenses. I mean, I think that really could have served the Nets well, especially because the defense Drew Holiday was playing on Kyrie. Giannis and KD were having some good battles there. So I think that he could have really, and I mean, Joe Harris it was tough for him to get free in those series. I think in those games, excuse me, it's like a mini series. I think that Harden could really change some of the dynamics of that series, just given his basketball mind. I think, glass half full, half empty. I mean, half full, those were games, as you said, without Harden, which you look at the way they're playing right now, and he's been one of their best defenders statistically in the postseason through 2 games. I mean, that can really go somewhere against Milwaukee. But also, as you said, I mean, Milwaukee's kind of built to stop them with their length and their, they have a guy like PJ Tucker off the bench that they can just throw on KD and not really miss much defensively, where the Nets don't really have a guy like that, as we've kind of discussed. So I think that's going to be a really hard series. And there's some stuff to take, especially with the way they guarded Giannis too, right? They dared him to shoot jumpers and it worked, but is that quantifiable through a 7-game series when you look at him being a 30% 3-point shooter through the season and, him shooting way above his averages against the Nets? I mean, it's going to be interesting to kind of see what worked in those mini series for the Nets. And if they knew what they were talking about and they come to work in a series, or they have to make significant adjustments. And it turns out that they had the wrong idea the whole time with some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as far as the playoffs go, because we're safely putting them through here, we don't think there's any way to lose to Boston, barring something very, very freakish. But like for the rest of the playoffs, who do you think is their X factor? Who do you think is the guy besides like that big three you think could be a big role player for them?
I think you got to look at Joe Harris. I mean, I think last night with the win, they improved to 13-1 in games where he scores 20 or more points. I just think that he's like the thermometer for the offense, right? When he's hot, good things happen for everybody else. So I think that him shooting well against any team is bad news for everyone. And if you saw what Brad Stevens was essentially saying, he's like, look, like, you can't double team these guys because they have someone like Joe Harris that can hit those shots. You really have to pick your spots with them. And when he's hitting shots like that, it gets they're really, really hard to stop. So I just think that you look at what his shooting brings and how it changes the dynamics of the offense. I mean, if he has more games like last night's going forward, like I have a hard time seeing the Nets losing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing while watching them in the playoffs is the defense, because obviously you mentioned they're playing better defense in the series, but again, Boston really only has like one big threat to stop. When you're going up against Milwaukee, potentially the Sixers in the conference finals here, is this somewhere where they can try and win games like 140 to 130, or they have to do better defensively to get to the finals?
I think two things can be true. It wouldn't stun me if they won 140, 130, but also with the way they're playing defense, I don't know if it's going to get to that point. So I don't expect some of these shootouts that they had in the regular season when they really didn't care about defense. They've, even Kevin Durant said after last night's game, he's more worried about their defense and their offense. So I think with that being the priority, they're trying to avoid those games as much as they can. I think if they had to get into a game like that, they're more likely to win than lose, just given their offensive firepower. But I think that the message has kind of been through the first two games that, they're not trying to win games like that. They're trying to go closer to, I think it's 125 or 120 points, like their magic number, to where they usually win if they get to that number. But they held Boston in 93 in the first game, and obviously last night was a little more up, but the game was a little more of a blowout down the line. So I mean, sorry, I think you just look at how they're winning right now. I think they'd like to kind of keep this formula off of last night's game more than go to the blowout route, the extreme route.
Yeah, also other things that interesting to see there is that when they inevitably get to one of these close games where it's down to the last possession, and I know we saw the Knicks Hawks, the other Julius Randle nick the shot. And that's have three options to potentially take that game winning shot. Like, who would you draw the playoff for if you were on the sideline of the big three of Harden, Durant, and Irving?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, you could throw Joe in there too, just based on some of the looks he'd get. I'd have no problem with him taking a wide open three if the other guys are covered, but I lean toward Durant just given he's the best of the three of them. But I mean, that's the luxury they have, right? They have all these options and you have no idea where they're going to go. I think you can make a case for any one of those guys getting the ball. I think it really comes down to the night they're having, though. Who's hot, who's not, who's playing well down the stretch and making the key baskets for them. If Durant scores 10 of the last, 12 points they have in the final few minutes, I mean, you have to go to him. Same thing if it were Harden or Irving. But I think that's the beauty of it, is that they have so many different ways to keep you on your heels in a situation like that. But because you asked me to pick one, I'd say Durant, but that's not a knock on the other three guys by any means.
No, I feel like honestly the guy under the most pressure on the team might be James Harden, because both Durant and Irving have rings elsewhere. Harden doesn't, and he has his reputation of like coming up small in the playoffs, especially in the West, where he's dealing with Durant and some of these teams. So like, how important do you think this playoffs is for James Harden to sort of build up his own reputation as a clutch playoff guy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's worried as much about the clutch stuff as he is just about getting the ring, but I definitely think that he's got something to prove. As you said, he's been so close in his career, right? I mean, he was a Chris Paul hamstring away from a trip to the finals, and a few in Houston, and obviously they've had some really loaded teams there. But I just think with him, he's kind of proven. Even last night he said, Joe had the hot hand. Our priority became feeding Joe. I think that he's handled this really well and kind of knows when to step up and when not to. If he needs to step up in a clutch situation, I'm sure he's going to get a shot. But I don't think he's worried as much about perception as much as just the result this time around.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the Nets, obviously, the result they want to get is obviously they want to at least get to the NBA Finals. I feel like this is a year where you look at the East, where the Sixers have Embiid, they don't have a ton around him. Milwaukee has flawed. The West teams are beating each other up. Like, would this be a massive win for the Nets? They don't at least get to the final, let alone have a shot at winning it.
Yeah, I think it's championship or bust. I think anything short of a finals appearance would be a disappointing season. And I think even some would slap me for saying that. I think it's definitely championship or bust, but I think at minimum, I mean, if they were to go out in the second round as good as Milwaukee is, it'd be a huge disappointment. The conference finals, as good as Philly is, I think the same way. I think getting to the finals is absolutely the priority.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I know there's a lot of priority on that side of, hey, we need to win this title to sort of make this a Nets town. And we've seen, by the way, the Knicks reception has been in the playoffs, how hard it will be to make New York a Nets town. What would winning the first title mean for them if they are able to pull us off and have the parade in August?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would definitely be huge for the fan base and them, kind of taking a cut out of the Knicks pie. But I don't know if the net, I feel like the Nets are always going to be compared to the Knicks because of geographic proximity. But the Knicks have been in the city forever. If you see a movie based in New York City, there's usually a Knicks game involved more than a Nets game. I think it's going to take a very long time for the Nets to overtake the Knicks if that would ever happen. And it's going to take even just in Brooklyn, for them to, for kids growing up to only know the Nets being in Brooklyn, right? And only know the Nets having success there. I mean, there's people like me that grew up with them being in New Jersey and then making the move. And then, I mean, until recently, they haven't really had much reason to cheer for them. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on that front for sure. And I think the Knicks being good actually could help the Nets, because if the Nets were to meet the Knicks in the playoffs, I think it would be good for the quote unquote rivalry, and actually put some juice there with both teams being good. Steve Nash is RJ Barrett's godfather, Mike D'Antoni, DeMar Stoudemire on staff. There is some cross pollination to build around if you're trying to make them actual rivals. But I just think that this year is good for that, but I don't think it's by any means, an end all be all. I think there's a lot of work to be done there for the Nets to kind of make themselves the city's team, if that's even on the table, given the Knicks' extensive history.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of people like my age and like up, or I feel like our Knicks fans, let that younger generation, it's not seen the Knicks win anything in 20 years, is one that's more up for grabs. They're not from like a Knicks family. I feel like this is the time where, like, if this team wins a title or two and has all these young kids walking around the city with the Harden jerseys or the Durant jersey, I think that's the opportunity the Nets have here.
That's very well said. I'd say the exact same thing.
All right, Alex, thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can we follow on social media, keep up with your coverage for The Athletic?
Yeah, I'm at Alex 2_ Schiffer, SCHIFFER. The Alex _ Schiffer was taken, so I had to go with 2 underscores. So SCHIFFER.
And Alex, I appreciate it all the time. And make sure you check out Alex's coverage on The Athletic. There's a lot of great stuff about the Nets every day.
Thank you for having me, man.
All right, I'm all set. Thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
No problem, man. Take care.